Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, the number one source for news, analysis, and discussion on the Detroit Red Wings, the NHL, and all things hockey. Here are your hosts, Ryan Hanna, Brad Crisco, and Evan Lopsinger.
I know. I'm not bringing it up. Nope.
Brad?
Nope.
Brad?
Nope.
Brad, today's date, February 26th. I know we've made this joke a lot. And I'm sorry to keep doing it. But today's date is February 26th. It's just you and I on this episode. Evan is not here, and it was unexpected. He wasn't planning on not being here today. Something came up. Wishing him the best. But last year, you and I recorded alone on February 26th. And that was after Patrick Kane scored the overtime winner in Chicago. We are unplanned a year to the day of that happening. And you and I happen to be running without Evan on this episode. Brad, we have to, and the Red Wings are in a playoff spot. Brad, we have to make the proclamation again. We have to do it. This is how we undo the curse.
Nope.
Come on, don't be a coward.
Nope.
Don't. Evan deserves to tune in and hear that we pulled this stupid move again. This just clicked right now. We're talking about, like, what are we going to open with? And I was like, oh my God.
Oh, the Red Wings had an 8-point cushion or something about that when we did this last year. It's far from that this time around, right? I am
That's
not.
right. That's right. You got to be brave, Brad.
Bait.
You got to be brave because that's what Evan would want us to do.
We were brave last year, Ryan, and what happened?
And then we got clipped with Curb Your Enthusiasm music put over the clip of us saying, and I'm sorry, you took the worst of it because it was you saying, I think this is a playoff team. Oh, boy.
And how's the Red Wings' luck been this week?
They didn't need luck, Brad. And that's what I'm saying. I think they don't need luck. Okay, this is getting ridiculous.
We're on a playoff run and down 2 centers. I can't tell you optimism's at an all-time high right now.
Suit up. All right, folks. We are without Evan on this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. You're stuck with Brad and I, and there is a lot happening in the Red Wings world right now. So welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, and lots more. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And Evan is not here. You know his line. On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we're going to be starting out not with the Husso trade, because that is a much bigger conversation. So we're first going to do the Minnesota game recap, in which Simon Edvinsson said absolutely not to a scheduled loss, all the takeaways from that game, and then what's coming up for the Red Wings with their 2 most consequential games of the season thus far against, predictably, if you told us this in October, the Columbus Blue Jackets, one of them being an outdoor game, of course. We are going to get into playoff implications, all that and more, before we jump into the Ville Husso to Anaheim Ducks trade, the Andrew Copp season-ending injury, the cap space that Steve Yzerman has to work with heading into the trade deadline, what's likely to happen, what could happen, his options, all of that ties together. There's league news, there's rumors, Zegras got suspended, which is hilarious, all of that and more. First, we want to let you know, Saturday, March 29th, Winged Wheel Podcast Night at the LCA. It's our partnered event with the Detroit Red Wings, where your ticket not only gets you a ticket to the Detroit Red Wings game against the Boston Bruins at a discounted rate, you also get access to the pregame live recording of the Winged Wheel Podcast at Little Caesars Arena. It's going to feature not just us, the hosts, but also Ken Daniels and possibly other special guests. Your ticket also gets you a Winged Wheel Podcast Detroit Red Wings co-branded jersey. It's a barber pole style jersey. They're really, really sweet. We just got eyes on them for the first time. And for those of you who like, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see the merch on the table we have from past events, hats, beanies. It's the Red Wings and Winged Wheel Podcast co-branded stuff. The only way to get this stuff is by going to the event. We can't sell it anywhere. It's NHL licensed merchandise. We do save a few back to give away as gifts to our patrons from time to time, which brings me to patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. If you want to support the show and join the so-called Dub Club, as Steve Dangle named it so long ago, you get access to benefits like our post-episode bonus recording of the Winged Wheel Podcast overtime segment. We answer any questions that didn't make the main show. We let loose, have fun. We had bloopers in there. It's a good time. You also get access to our Patreon exclusive Winged Wheel Podcast Discord. Additionally, you're automatically entered into all of our giveaways. We give away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game going directly to our Patreon supporters. So again, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. The Minnesota Wild rematch. The first rendition was the first game back from the Four Nations break. Detroit collapsed for the first time in 2 days. They did it consecutive days, and that was the first one. It was at home, and they gave away what was supposed to be a regulation win. Unfortunate, they walked away with a point, and you're like, that's not great. And the rematch is in Minnesota, and that was Detroit's 3rd game in 4 days. There's a time zone shift there a little bit. You're on the road. You're gassed. I don't really buy into scheduled losses. I think there's points in the schedule where if you see a poor result or rusty play or guys just look off, it's understandable. But that was, in some people's eyes, a scheduled loss. And Detroit flipped the script. They were down 2-0, not a great first period, and through some luck and an absolute cannon from Simon Edvinsson and some poor goaltending and just doing what they need to do, they scraped out a 3-2 win and walked away with 5 of 6 possible points for their first 3 games out of the break, which was honestly kind of funny by the end of it.
Given how those games went, in one hand, it feels like it should have been 6. On the other hand, it feels like a minor miracle they got 5. So I guess we got to be happy with the outcome. We definitely got to be happy with the outcome. And furthermore, when you get a period into that 3rd game, it was looking like it was going to be 3 of 6 points. So yeah, this is a fantastic result.
At this point in the season too, I always maintain the NHL season is too long, but at this point in the season especially, you always profess, and this is one of the examples of, it's never going to be a perfect 60-minute hockey game, and you're absolutely not going to have complete hockey games start to end of an 82-game season, right? So not to excuse it, we talk about every individual game quite detailed and, focus in on it, and we zero in on whatever's happening in that given moment. But grand scheme of things, if you have a rough stretch of hockey and you're walking away with 5 or 6 points, then yeah, if that was offered to you the day before you came back from the break, Todd McLellan and Dylan Larkin and the Red Wings are saying, oh, we're absolutely taking that. So the game started out a 2-0 deficit at the hands of Marco Rossi and Jacob Lauko, and the Red Wings weren't looking that great. It was kind of dull, a little bit off, a little bit, I don't want to say listless completely, but they just looked like a team that was similar to what we said for previous games, gassed. They didn't really have the legs, and they just didn't have it together. And you see this when you're on the road. You know if the team can break out of it based on how they come out in the second period. In the second period, they managed to hang on. Deficit didn't get any bigger, and the scoring started for Detroit. Vladimir Tarasenko gets his 8th. Good job on the back door. Just barely didn't count as a power play goal. But Erik Gustafsson, who I last episode of the episode before said he doesn't have much deception to his game. Well, he made a great pass from the point, essentially a backdoor pass to Tarasenko, and kind of looked off the lane. The goalie wasn't anticipating it, was really just the perfect pass to make for Tarasenko to bury as easily as possible. So credit to Gustafsson. That was an excellent, excellent play. Marco Kasper gets a secondary assist there. And then the Simon Edvinsson show started. Just a bizarre blast from the point. Had no business going in. Perfectly placed shot. Cannon of a shot. He started winding up in the neutral zone. Literally, I think Dimitri posted a screenshot of it. It was a neutral zone windup, steps in, slap shot, perfect. Like, it was too fast for the camera to even catch. Should not have beat Gustafsson. Just putting that out there.
Yeah, no shot from what ended up being probably 2 feet inside the blue line should ever beat a goalie in the NHL without a screen or a deflection. But when you're as tall as Edvinsson is, you can get a lot of torque on that stick. And I think he got every bit of it, and he needed every bit of it.
Alex DeBrincat on the primary assist, which brings him to a 7-game point streak, just been absolutely on fire. 11 points in that span, if I remember correctly, 5 goals, 6 assists. So excellent from DeBrincat, excellent from Edvinsson, who is laughing. Like he's like, I know that was not supposed to go in. Hysterical. And then in third period, again, tied 2-2. Simon Edvinsson again. This one I want to start. It was an all Swedish goal. Edvinsson, cannon, from the point again from Johansson and Elmer Soderblom, but that was a hell of a secondary assist because Soderblom's zone entry and control that puck and maintaining possession all the way down and then back to Johansson, who gave it back to Edvinsson. Just a great play from the big man.
Everybody on that play made a very, very, not high end, but great play to make that happen. Like you said, with Soderblom's entry and cutback, even Johansson looked like he was skating into a shot. I was a little upset initially that he didn't take the shot because he was, in range with traffic. But then the way he pivots, and I don't even know how he saw Edvinsson streaking in with the angle he was on, hits him, and then, Edvinsson with a perfect shot off the post and in. Just all around great play. The type of play you need in a game like that where everything has to be perfect if you're going to get a goal because you're slogging out every other second of it.
Another player who wasn't really, he was on a score sheet with a secondary assist, but I thought Kasper made a lot of key plays that game in both. Yeah, he was on the score sheet for a goal, but also good defensive play, tied up the puck late as well. The Red Wings didn't get scored on with the net empty this time. It wasn't an ugly win. I'm not going to call it an ugly win, but it was one of those wins where you don't have all your tools. You're not firing on all cylinders. You got some lucky goals. I don't want to take away from Edvinsson. They were good shots, but a goalie should be saving that. At least the first one.
Yeah. The second one, the goalie had the benefit of
that puck was moving around and that was a rip.
He had to change angles. There was a bit of traffic and he put it in the impossible just over the pad spot off the post and in.
He was feeling it. He's like, I'm Al McInnes now. But the Red Wings battled and they scraped out that win. And that's the kind of, this is when I'm going to get the comments of I'm way too optimistic and I just spout out too much optimism about this team, especially because they haven't had a playoff run in far too many years now. But if you want to make the playoffs, these are the kinds of games you have to be able to eke out from time to time. If you're playing poorly, you still have to find the results. An 82-game season is a slog, but the teams who make it through, who aren't at the very, very, very top, are the ones who get these results. And with Columbus winning too, you especially don't want to start losing points to them because you have 2 straight games against Columbus, who are a wild card rival now. So the Red Wings win 3-2. Perfect result. They get the regulation win. It feels like they stole one back from earlier in the weekend. And again, like we said, 5 of 6. So all in all, right, we said at the top, you take this every single time. You have takeaways, you have learnings, but no one's going to look at this game and be pessimistic about it because you're like, it feels like they walked into Minnesota and stole one.
Bonus points. We'll call them bonus points.
Bonus points indeed. Now, what they have upcoming, after that game, first wild card, we're recording at 5:30 Eastern on Wednesday. So first wild card, 66 points in 58 games. Columbus is 2 points back and 2 regulation wins back, which is important because that's the first tiebreaker in the same number of games played. Ottawa has a game in hand, but they're 4 points back, but they also have 22 regulation wins already. So Detroit will have some catching up to do if they want to match that tiebreaker. And the Rangers are 4 points back, same amount of games played, but they have 5 more regulation wins. They have 27. So that is a beefy number that Detroit might be hard-pressed to catch up to. Then you have Boston, who has played one more game than Detroit, but is 4 points back. I don't want to say they're done for the season. It does feel like, if you're exploring trading Marchand and throwing in the towel, so to speak, you never say never, especially in the wild card race, but I'm not saying they're guaranteed to miss, just they're not the biggest threat right now. And then you get into Montreal, Philly, the Islanders. They're not necessarily threatening as much as we speak. Detroit and Columbus, neck and neck. Detroit has Columbus on Thursday at home, 7 p.m. Eastern. And then on the road, outdoors, in Ohio, at Buckeye Stadium, the outdoor game on March 1st, 6 p.m. Eastern. The NHL is so lucky, man. The NHL is so lucky that they set it out that way. The Detroit Red Wings, who haven't been to the playoffs in closer to a decade than not, and the Columbus Blue Jackets, who everyone was expecting to be one of, if not the worst team in the NHL this year. And it turns into a must-watch, massive playoff implication game with a warm-up 2 days before.
too many. See, this is where my pessimism's coming out. Because one, you're right. They got lucky, and these games are huge. We have the anniversary of the optimism episode when it all went off the rails. Remember, the year before, it's almost the trade deadline. You're a week out. The Red Wings have a back-to-back against the team they're directly competing with for that last playoff spot. It's Columbus this time. It was Ottawa that time. And those two games went so poorly, they sold off Filip Hronek and Tyler Bertuzzi a couple days later. I'm not a person who believes in superstition or omens or any of that stuff, but man, it's hard to not notice these things right now.
Do you know the meme of the guy who's mining and then he's walking away, but there's like one sliver of a dirt wall left before all the diamonds?
Yeah.
That's us, Brad. We just have to say they're going to make the playoffs one more time. Just
look at the camera and
no,
say it.
I want you to do it because you know you're the one who got clipped, and I think you deserve to have the glory of being right about it for the first time. So, Brad, you do the honors. Just say it into the camera, man.
No.
So, talking seriously about these two games, though, they're the biggest games of the season so far. There will be bigger ones down the line. You hope, because that means Detroit's still in the race and they haven't fallen out of it, or sliver of a chance, but maybe they just run away and then nothing really matters by the end because they're firmly in it. But they're not technically must wins. Detroit could lose both of these and still be within a game of turning things around and passing Columbus again. So anyone who says you have to win these, if you don't win, it's over, that's dramatic. It's just not the way the standings work. But my God, is this an opportunity to make a massive impact on the space you have between one of the biggest contenders, because we were talking pre-show. Boston has what we chatted about. Ottawa has a lot of injuries right now. So New York and Columbus are the two biggest threats. Ottawa and Boston can come back into this. So can other teams. Not saying it's impossible, but those are the two biggest threats. You only have to hold off one of them if you think about it that way. So if you put 4 points between you and Columbus, and those are direct wins, that's huge. Or in my mind, I just want to set this as, if you can walk away with 2 points in a regulation win over those two games, that's also like, you're not happy with a loss, but you're not really beating yourself up.
It's an 8-point swing, though. That's the thing. It's hard to ignore because 2 regulation wins for Detroit, they're 6 points up on Columbus with the tiebreaker, which, so for all intents and purposes, it's a 7-point lead because Columbus would have to leapfrog Detroit fully to get ahead of them. You lose both games in regulation, you're 2 points back looking up at Columbus then. So instead of a 6-point gap with tiebreaker, you're 2 points behind. Now, again, it's unlikely either team's going to get 4 points with the other team getting 0. You got to assume you're going to split or a game's going to go to overtime in all likelihood. But still, it's massive. And again, you still have to worry about Boston and the Rangers and Ottawa. It's not just Columbus, but it is Columbus. So you absolutely cannot go 0 for 4 here. Again, you're right. Technically speaking, it's not must win, but you make it a hell of a lot harder for yourself if you go 0 for 4 points wise. Because again, over these two games, the Rangers are still playing, the Bruins are still playing, the Senators are still playing.
I get what you're saying, but of all the teams, if you're going to drop 2, and not saying like this is going to happen or that it's a good thing if it, like, not at all, but if you're going to drop 2, you kind of want it to be against Columbus, because if Columbus wins those 2, let's say in regulation, they just get 2 straight regulation wins against the Red Wings. Yeah, then Detroit is down 2 points. Well, they're tied in regulation wins in that hypothetical, and Detroit still has one more ROW, so regulation or overtime win. So Detroit still has the tiebreaker if they manage to then get back even with them. So you shouldn't. I'm going to stop short of saying you cannot. You definitely shouldn't. And also in the emotional aspect of the playoff race too, like there's going to be an aspect here of Steve Yzerman and Todd McLellan and the Red Wings evaluating, this is crunch time. It's right before the trade deadline. Like you said, Brad, the analog to the Ottawa games from a couple of years ago where they got dunked on and then that was like, yeah, this team is not ready for the playoffs. We're selling the pieces that we should be selling. You need to see if this team is prepared for these crunch time big moments. Dylan Larkin just came back from the Four Nations final, and so that's going to seem way bigger, but he wants this team playing playoff games, and they have to approach these games with a playoff mentality. What are you going to do when there are more than just 2 points on the line? What are you going to do when you have the opportunity to seize a massive chunk of that playoff spot in front of you and push back a team that is chasing you and has been doing exceptionally well in doing so? Has been ahead at points. So that's the kind of thing where if you come out with a good performance, or at least an acceptable performance, it inspires a lot of confidence. Knock on wood, it doesn't happen, but if this is a repeat of the Ottawa thing from the past, they are not out of it mathematically. The team is not going to go out and sell pieces they shouldn't sell, but it might signal something to the general manager and the coach and the organization as a whole of, okay, well, how aggressive are we going to be at the deadline? Is it worth going out and buying a depth defenseman to help these guys? Is it worth going out and buying a center replacement if he's available when, in crunch time, they didn't really get it done anyways? These are all hypotheticals, but those kind of questions are on the line. And that is the way, to a degree, that GMs and teams think about these moments, because it's just the trade deadline and these two games, it couldn't have lined up better for the drama of it all.
And I know this is talking about late February games and I guess what will eventually be a March 1st game. But every time we have a conversation about this is an important game because it's Columbus or Boston or whoever's that's in the race with them, I can't help but remember what Detroit's April schedule looks like.
Yep.
It's one thing to be in the race going into April. I feel like if they're going to have a realistic shot, they have to have I'm not saying they need to be like 8 or 10 points, but they need a bit of a cushion going into April. Like they can't be tied with Columbus and Boston and the Rangers and expect to make the playoffs. Looking at that gauntlet they have to finish the season, they probably need to be 3 or 4 points clear just by the way the schedule works.
So I do agree with you. But Columbus, and for that sake, actually, the Rangers as well, they also have pretty tough strengths of schedule. I think they're up there as well. So
that helps.
It does help. It's all this to say, like, because we've made a meal of it, justifiably, of what the Red Wings have remaining. It's an uphill battle for two of the biggest contenders as well.
Yeah, that's fair. The Rangers do have Shesterkin, which will always scare the living hell out of me if it comes down to us versus them type of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Shesterkin is just one of those guys. Shesterkin is the current goalie in that bucket of people forget how good you can be. In the moment you're not at the top of your game, they just write you off. I'm like, are we really doing this again with Shesterkin? It's so dumb. It'll be another goalie in a different year. I think to a certain degree it happens with players too. I really can't believe how much people are trying to put Ranson in the same bucket as Pettersson right now. That's a different conversation. Okay. That's the Red Wings, their win against Minnesota, their 2 upcoming games. Plenty more to come, especially about the trade that Detroit participated in and potential trades that may be upcoming. But first, a word from the sponsors of the Winged Wheel podcast. You know how it is. When you're on a tight schedule, grabbing fast food might seem like the only option. But let's be real. Most fast food isn't exactly helping you hit your health goals. That's why we've been using Tempo. Tempo makes it easy to get a high-protein, chef-crafted meal on the table in just 3 minutes. So we can eat well without compromising our much-needed trade deadline episode recording time or our nutrition. Tempo is a weekly delivery service that brings fresh, dietitian-approved meals straight to your door. Their single-serving meals are designed to be fast, feel good, and delicious, with over 20 options to choose from every week. Whether you're looking for calorie-conscious, carb-conscious, fiber-rich, or protein-packed meals, Tempo's got something for you. We went for the protein ourselves, and we loved the spinach artichoke chicken with farro and the sweet and tangy chicken. For a limited time, Tempo is offering our listeners 60% off your first box. Just go to tempomeals.com/wingedwheel to grab this deal. That's tempomeals.com/wingedwheel for 60% off your first box. tempomeals.com/wingedwheel. Rules and restrictions may apply. Welcome back. A lot happened that wasn't on ice news for the Red Wings. Trevor Zegras got suspended. We got to make the hilarious clip of him saying, "No way, no way." And then we put our own Curb Your Enthusiasm meme on someone else. Andrew Copp underwent surgery. He's out for the season. Terrible news for the Red Wings. But we'll start with I don't want to say shocking news. Like, this isn't the world's biggest trade and not even the most consequential trade for the Red Wings. But the most interesting news, which was Ville Husso was traded to the Anaheim Ducks not long after the Anaheim game for future considerations. A player the Red Wings are familiar with, his brother Future Considerations, was actually just traded to Detroit in the Jake Wallman deal last offseason. I'm very sorry for that joke. As a reminder, Future Considerations effectively means nothing in the NHL. There's, if you look in the past, sometimes down the road, they send like a 7th round draft pick, or back when there were more rounds than that. Like, it means nothing. Nothing is coming back to the Red Wings. There is no return here. Plain and simple. So the Red Wings sent Ville Husso to the Anaheim Ducks. He's on the last couple months of his contract. It was a $4.75 million contract. $1.15 million was buried in the minors as he was waived and sent to the AHL, where he's been for most of the season. So $3.6 million in cap space and $1.31 million in real cash owed. So that's what the Red Wings are saving. Not that that matters for anyone else other than Chris Ilitch. Anaheim took this on for they got no sweetener here. And some people were wondering why. At the end of the day, it is still a favor in my mind from Pat Verbeek to Steve Yzerman, of course. But Anaheim also had their own depth injuries in the pipeline between them and the Gulls, and they needed goaltending. They needed someone to play. They want that team to do well. And Gibson is hurt, and if he's not hurt, he's in trade conversations. And so they just wanted someone there for the rest of the season that could ostensibly play pro hockey at a reasonable level in net. Detroit benefits by the cap space. Yeah, you save $3.6 million on the cap. You have more room now where you're accruing. You can pay Kane's bonuses more comfortably, all that good stuff. You can make a trade. You have more space for Kosa and Campbell. There's less of a roster jam down there. It really is, in my mind, like, is it a massive win? No. Anyone calling this massive it just doesn't have that kind of scale to it. But it's a win for Detroit. They got to move on from that contract. They didn't have to give anything up. And Ville Husso gets a chance to prove somewhere else that he is still an NHL goalie, because he's going to need a new contract in the summer.
This was a little shocking. It's not often you see an NHL team willing to take on a $4.75 million goalie who's playing in the NHL without a big sweetener being attached to it. Like, I thought there was a chance at some point this season that if the Red Wings made a bigger trade, call it Dylan Cousins for hypothetical sake, that they could send Husso's contract back the other way as kind of we got to balance out the books a little bit as we're doing this. But yeah, maybe it's Verbeek's apology for Trevor Zegras. Like, hey man, we're sorry about Rass here. We'll take him. No sweetener.
Sorry, he was such a brat about it on the ice.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's even if Yzerman has no plans for this cap space, it's still a win.
Yep.
Because one, yeah, like, it's flexibility, and flexibility is always huge. If for no other reason than they absorb all of Patrick Kane's bonus money this season, it doesn't carry into next year's cap.
Yep.
That's a win. And now, if something does arise, like a Pettersson, a Marner, a Rantanen, a Cousins, whether it affects this year's sheet or next year's sheet, it's savings. Because if you get that guy this year, you have the space. If you get that guy next year, you don't have Kane's bonuses there. Like, like I said, the ultimate point, if Yzerman had no plans for this cap space, it's still a huge net win in terms of the flexibility it provides.
You now have an opportunity to stand pat. You have an opportunity to make a big move. You have an opportunity to maybe, and this is going to sound like heresy, absorb a contract like you're a rebuilding team. You don't want to make a lot of changes to the Red Wings if you think they're doing well or there's not someone out there for the right price. That's fine. You can still acquire an asset by just retaining some cap on a guy who's going elsewhere, but you just become that middleman in the trade, and then you get a piece for it. Chicago, unfortunately, set that price way too low this year with Rantanen, but we'll see how it is around the deadline. It gives you that flexibility, so that's good. This bleeds into some other news that the Red Wings got. On the flip side of things, really unfortunate, the hit that DeBrincat laid on Brock Faber that caused a scrum, and we talked about it last episode. Copp got his arm up, his arm got caught. He immediately, he dropped his arm and it looked like something was really off. Well, it was a pectoral issue, and he had surgery, and he's out for the season. I think 4 to 6 months is the expected recovery time. Brutal news. Brutal news for the Red Wings. Terrible news for Copp, who I think was playing his most consistently solid hockey. Like, this is Andrew Copp, and he's a contributing solid member in the middle of the lineup, especially under McLellan. Detroit, who doesn't really have center depth behind Larkin consistently, they now lose theirs for the rest of the season in Copp when they're trying to make a playoff push. And this begs the question, what's the replacement? Is it JT Compher, who's not having as good of a season as he was last year when he was in that role? Is it Marco Kasper, who do you really want to pull him off that first line where he's doing fantastically? He's one of the top scoring rookies in the NHL since he got up there. Is it someone external? Are you really going to pay for Brock Nelson? What's the cost going to be for a guy like that? Is it Veleno or Rasmussen whenever Rask gets healthy? It's kind of a tough spot.
The level of pain when the team that doesn't have a second line center loses their second line center. Like it's
you almost didn't want to jinx it. Like when it was going okay with Copp, I was like, no one really talked about it because we were like,
everybody shut up. This is fine. Shut up.
It's working okay.
Don't jinx it.
Is he driving that line? Absolutely not, but it's working because before, depending on how him or Compher or Rasmussen or whoever they were trying was on that line, they were sinking that line at points. It was working.
This is the point where everybody needs to be reminded. Yes, we want to make the playoffs this year. Yes, whatever they do for the rest of this year matters and is serious. But everything they do still needs to be with their focus to the future. You're not going and giving up a first-round pick for Brock Nelson. You're not going out and giving up a second-round pick for Yanni Gourde. That's not something the Red Wings should be doing for the sake of getting blown out in the first round of the playoffs. Let's get that out of the way. Now, the internal solution is Compher's your second line center, Rask is your third line center, and Veleno's your fourth line center when everybody's healthy. It's not ideal, but they've made it work with less before. You don't want to pull Kasper off that top line because that just creates even bigger problems down the lineup because, well, there's nobody other than Kane, DeBrincat, or Kasper who's going to keep up there, full stop. So if you have to pull one of them off the second line to replace it, again, you're filling one hole by creating another. So if it's me, I don't touch that. If there's a center out there who's decent, and I'm talking about rentals here, that you can get for a third, fourth, fifth round pick, okay. I would hear that argument, and that might be worthwhile because, again, I think outside of your top 2 round picks, nothing is sacred with the draft and the Red Wings anymore with where they're at.
Even a second round pick for the right guy,
if for the right guy, yeah.
You don't throw him away for someone who's expiring and is a depth of the lineup player, but I don't know.
You get a guy with an extra year on there, sure. I don't think the second round's that sacred, but it's not rental price yet for the Red Wings. You know what I mean?
And you did already give one away, so maybe you don't make a habit of that.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, we're not going to. That's twice this episode, right?
Sorry, Brad. You keep going. Yeah, Evan's not here, and I have to be the one to just stir it up.
I'm the pessimistic one here. But this could, looking at the camera, could, not will or should, expedite a bigger deal if Yzerman is still looking at a Cousins, a Pettersson, whoever that might be. Okay, you maybe now have reasons to rush it. Don't think that's always the best mindset to have because this is the position where teams get in where they make the biggest mistakes. They're not a good team yet. They get overexcited. They overpay for something that's a little too short-term focused, and it hurts them long-term. Not catastrophically or anything like that, but again, you have to always keep in the back of your mind what this season actually truly is and what you're building towards. But if the Red Wings are this close on a deal for, again, we'll go back to Cousins, maybe you pay the little extra. Like, I'm not saying you go from like a 4th round pick to a 1st round pick, but if you're a B level prospect to a B plus level prospect apart in terms of negotiations, maybe you just pay the B plus at this point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That little upgrade's worth it for the benefit you'll get the rest of this season. Is that a situation the Red Wings are probably sitting at right now? No, probably not. But on the hypothetical. So they could go a lot of ways here. I think the prudent move is to just stand pat. Don't make a panic trade. You don't need a rental. Again, Comfort, not as good as Copp was in that role this year, but he's passable. Rasmussen's passable. Again, him on the 3rd line with Berggren and Soderblom were downright good. So when he comes back, that eases your mind, and then you slap Veleno with whoever. This team is top heavy, and they are winning because they're top heavy. So we don't need to overreact and panic in the depth areas.
I agree. It's like you see the number, you see 14 million in effective deadline cap space, because that's because of the accrual, just to make it abundantly clear here. The Red Wings don't have like an average annual cap space of 14 million, but your cap space after the accrual that we've been talking about all season is around 14 million. That's what it'll be at the deadline. Just because you have that doesn't mean it changes the calculus. Like you said, Brad, for reasons of protecting your assets and understanding where this team is at, I don't really think this team has, like, they're embracing this playoff run and they want to make it. Damn, does Yzerman want to make the playoffs? Damn, does ownership want to make the playoffs? Oh my God, does the LCA deserve to see playoff hockey? Absolutely. But you don't sell pieces just to make that happen 1 year stupidly. You got to be responsible. If you have an opportunity, if something comes up, like you mentioned, if there's for one reason or another, there's a guy who can help replace what Petrie could have been doing on the 3rd pair. And I know that might sound funny to people, but Petrie on the 3rd pair is different than Petrie on the 2nd pair. And they're hurting for that right now on the right side. Yeah, you do it for the right price. Or a centerman. It's just like a right shot defenseman who can help you, or a centerman, are two of the most expensive things that everyone is looking for every single deadline, right? So it's not likely to happen, but if an opportunity comes up, you do it. But I still think, like you said, if it's not something that's going to help long-term, that you believe in, you're not spending that cap space to spend the cap space. You're fitting in Kane's bonus, so you're helping next year's cap space, and you give yourself the flexibility. All this does is open doors for Steve Yzerman, and it means nothing is out of the question. Where in previous years, you could have said, oh my God, this team is close to capped out. For what reason? So now, if at the end of it, all they do is facilitate a trade, get a 3rd, and then, dump Tarasenko, it's boring, but that's a successful trade deadline.
And you also got to think, circling back to the point at center specifically, what does a 3rd round pick get you for center as a rental? I can tell you, whoever it is not going to be better than JT Compher. Not going to be better than Michael Rasmussen. So are you really paying for a rental to play on your 4th line and replace Veleno? Probably not. So you either got to give up a premium, which, as we talked about, not worth it at this point, or you got to get someone long-term, and you're going to have to pay up. But at least then it makes sense for now and beyond.
And not that there's ever tampering in the NHL, but if you do bring in a guy who's on a rental, like maybe you can read a guy's mind, or maybe, you happen to run into his agent on the phone via text message and say, how interested would he be in signing long-term? Sometimes that does happen where they get the notion that a guy would stay, and that's part of the process. And every player's situation is different too. Sometimes guys are looking for a change of scenery, and the team trading him actually allows him to talk to other teams, in which case that wouldn't be tampering, and you can have those discussions before you make the trade too. So it's not a hard and fast rule of no rentals, because technically you could pick up a guy who's on an expiring contract, but have him signed not long after. Carolina would love for that to be the case right now with Rantanen, but evidently not. So Detroit has a world of opportunity because of an unfortunate, scenario with Andrew Copp, although that doesn't really factor into the cap space. It's really just because of the Ville Husso trade. And just to circle back on Ville Husso, just a bummer. We really thought that guy had a chance to do it. And for a little spurt there, he did look like he might be able to be an answer for a few years here for Detroit and net, and it fell off and it never came back. So I hope for his sake he's able to find something in Anaheim to set him up this offseason, but just wasn't going to be happening in Detroit. A lot of cap space. The trade deadline's approaching. Friday, March 7th. We're a week and a bit away here, so we'll see how things develop. To that end, it was suggested by Nick Kyprios, I believe. Kipper mentioned that Binnington has a market right now for his services. He is not an expiring contract. He has a couple years left after this one. He mentioned a few teams being potentially interested in him, and Detroit was one of the names in that list. This time of year, you got to be careful. Not that people make things up. I don't think that's it at all. But behind leaks, especially in the NHL, there's usually motive. Is this an agent thing trying to drum up a market? Is this a GM trying to drum up a market? Or is this real interest? It's hard to know for sure, but I thought it was an interesting suggestion. Binnington, 2 years left at $6 million, 14-team no-trade list. Just showed up extremely well at the Four Nations face-off. Possibility?
Yeah, if you look at it in a bubble, $6 million for, at worst an average NHL starting goalie who has the capability to do what he just did. The Red Wings probably are 2 years away from Kosa establishing himself as a starter because he's probably going to come into the league as a backup before.
At least 2 years. I think he has the boring but likely answer is next year is a transition, third goalie guy who gets in a good handful of games unless he seizes more.
Yeah. So from that standpoint, I get it. I guess the path with Kosa is probably the confusing part for me with Binnington because I gotta think the plan for Kosa is to be the backup in Detroit for a bulk of the year next year, but Talbot's still under contract, so if you bring in Binnington, it creates a bit of a logjam there. Again, with health and all that stuff, you got to assume Kosa would get some games, so that's fine. And then the year after that, you're running Binnington and Kosa. And then after that, Binnington's a free agent. You hope Kosa's ready by that point. If not, you can bring in another Cam Talbot type. It makes sense. But then again, I circle back to what's Binnington going to cost?
Yeah, that's what it comes down to.
And are those assets better served on a different position for Detroit? Which I would argue firmly, yes, those would be spent better on a center, another scoring forward, a left shot D. With where the Red Wings are sitting, goalie would be very far down my list of priorities when you're giving up a first round pick or a top prospect. You know what I mean? I don't think the Red Wings first round pick is sacred. I think it's going to be mid first, so it's still highly valuable. But again, where are the giant holes on this team now and going forward? It's at center. It's at top six scoring, and it's at left shot D. If you're going to spend it, goalie's not the place to spend it, is basically my ultimate point on Binnington.
And with Binnington too, is I know what you're saying with Kosa. I don't necessarily see as much of a challenge there because where Kosa is next year is not decided by how he's playing at the start of the season or how he's been playing lately, and things haven't necessarily been going the Griffins' way for this last chunk of games here, but it's what he's going to do next offseason and then into training camp and preseason. And that's where he'll decide, is he the third goalie? Is he the backup? Is he going to just go back down to Grand Rapids because he just didn't have a good start to the year and then make his way up later? It's boring and it might be infuriating, but that could be what happens. You don't know what's going to happen with Lyon. I mean, teams are definitely calling Detroit on Talbot and Lyon, and the answer they're getting is, well, we need these guys for this hopeful playoff run. So if you're going to try to peel one of them away, it's going to cost you more than it should. And I just don't know that a team's going to pay that price. Goalie markets are weird, and goalies are difficult to trade, even though a lot of teams need one. Is Lyon poised to return next season? Not necessarily, but I wouldn't rule it out. Probably a team's going to give him more money in free agency. Talbot has another year left, but let's say hypothetically, Binnington comes in, the trade is worthwhile for Detroit. You have Talbot, you have Kosa. Okay, Kosa earns his way on. Cam Talbot at $2.5 million is going to be attractive to a lot of teams, right? So it's not hard to solve in my mind, but ultimately, what's Binnington going to cost when I think the only time his value is higher is when he won the Stanley Cup than it is right now. So that price is likely to be extremely high. So I don't necessarily think this is a likely outcome, to say the least, but it's not the most insane thing I've ever heard.
No, absolutely not. Where I would come on this one too is if you're looking at the same cap hits and the same cost.
Evan's not here to
Evan's not here for this one. I think all things being equal, and with them being buddies, if you're looking for a 2-year more proven stopgap in net, I think you get John Gibson cheaper. In terms of assets, you'd have to give up than Jordan Binnington.
Well, then you could be a cap team and you can just put him on LTIR.
Well, that's the thing, because if you're looking for that stability, but also that window for Kosa, John Gibson's injury history doesn't scare you, because if he's healthy for the first 2 months of the season and then he goes down for 2 months, well, there's Kosa's time to prove himself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think Binnington, you're probably giving up a first plus another really good asset to get him. I don't think Gibson's going to cost you that much. And I'm not saying Gibson is better than Binnington. I'm saying they're probably far more comparable than people are willing to admit. They both have 2 years left on their deal. They're both around $6 million AAV. If I don't have to give up the first round pick, I'm not giving up the first round pick. Right?
These storylines are going to start to come up. People are going to see Detroit's cap space, and people are going to see that Detroit is wanting to move into, the playoff contention window here, and everyone is going to try to draw everything to Detroit as people create trade boards, try to create narratives for either stories or their clients or their players are trying to trade, or because it's real, everything is going to be tied to Detroit to a ridiculous degree. There's going to be a lot of noise.
I mean, they're a team on the rise, battling for a playoff spot, tons of cap space, tons of assets.
Original 6 team, tons of attention.
There's reasons, you can justify reasons for just about every player on the market right now as to why Detroit would be interested. It doesn't mean they actually should be.
All right, let's move on to some NHL news here. Well, I mean, related to the Red Wings. Trevor Zegras. No way, he said, after he lit up Michael Rasmussen's head. No way. Yes way, Trevor. Yes way. Earns himself a 3-game suspension. It slam dunk case, really. If the Department of Player Safety is going to that quick announce the hearing and then that quick announce a multi-gamer, that's a slam dunk case. Presented as such, yes way indeed. And I will say Trevor Zegras probably earned an extra game through no fault of his own because the refs on the ice called absolutely zero, zilch, nothing. If Mickey Redmond is disagreeing with you that vehemently, you're either not dropping the puck quick enough, which I was with him on that.
I've been with him for years on that one. It's maddening.
He said drop the puck, not, what the...
yeah.
But it's funny either way, and I'm sure he was thinking it. And if he was saying, how do you not call anything? And what are you throwing your hands up? The refs screwed Zegras over. Not that I'm crying for him, although that would have, the Red Wings ultimately got the win, but that could have changed the way that game unfolded.
Or the Red Wings up 4-2 at that point. A 5-minute power play with the way the Red Wings power play is clicking, you don't think that ends up being at least a 5-2 lead?
You'd think so. Or you'd hope so.
And then Anaheim comes back to tie it 4-4. You could argue it swayed the outcome of the game. Thankfully, the Wings ended up getting the win still.
But a regulation win would have been nicer.
Yep.
And so, I don't know, to me, the 3 games, I was counting on 2, and then I was like, oh, yeah, he got nothing. And so 3 games, that's apt for me. And I actually think the Department of Player Safety is on a little streak here of getting these things right.
But being the NHL, not everything can be operating, because I know you alluded to the fact that the refs called nothing and there was a suspension, and that has happened multiple times this season now, which is insane. And I heard a lot of arguments that, well, they need to have a system in place where they can review plays like this. They do. And the refs chose not to utilize it.
Yeah.
Because you can call it a major and go all the way down to nothing. And the dichotomy of, I think it was the same night, Casey Cizikas lays a beautiful hit on Liam Bichsel of the Stars, gets called a major, they review it, uphold it as a major, toss him from the game. And he gets no supplemental discipline. I understand no professional sports ref is going to be super consistent. It's a tough job. Every ref in every sport gets the same optics to different degrees, but I feel like this year has been particularly rough for the NHL in this department because the poor examples, which you're always going to have been on the more extreme end of things. But then it's such a tough look optically for the league when those two plays happen at almost the same time. When you look at those two hits, you'd be like, one should not be a penalty. One guy should be tossed from the game. And it's the wrong guys. It's a tough look.
I think the juxtaposition of Rasmussen getting such a clean clock to the head and nothing called on Zegras, and then that one, which was marginal, got a upheld after review, 5 in a game. That's it for me. I've watched that one a few times. My initial reaction was that's not a 5 in a game. Or you want to call that a penalty because of head contact? I didn't see every angle, but I saw enough to hear the justification from those who thought it was a penalty. But then you look at the rule book and can you call it that way? Like, I understand the issue with that hit in general. I was like, could it have been cleaner? Probably. Do I want to see that called 5 in a game? Personally, I don't. It's unfortunate that he got hurt, and I could be completely wrong, but I don't know. I'm having a hard time seeing past the lens of the Rasmussen one wasn't called and that one was. That wasn't a 5 in a gamer to me.
It's, like I said, that's kind of where the NHL, I'm hoping, I don't think that this is going to be the night that finally makes the NHL do something. I don't have a good answer as to what, but kind of lay down the law with the refs going, okay, you have this review system. Use it. Get it right. And this is coming from the guy who hates reviews with a passion. I probably hate reviews more than every other hockey fan out there. But if you have it, use it. Understand the process, understand the rules, call it as such.
And it does look like it's like, I don't think it's perfectly shoulder to chest. He catches his head as he ducks down. But
you're talking about the Bischel one, right?
Yeah, it's
like
just,
there's enough head contact to make you pause, but this whole, and I hate the phrase, but I got to use it because it's the argument right now. Primary point of contact, and also in the rule book, it's worded in a way that states head contact with intent to injure is the only way you're allowed to toss a guy. That's the rule. There's no 5-minute major for head contact. It's a match or it's nothing. You cannot tell me Zegras was trying to hurt Bischel with that hit because he's low, he's not launching. Like Zegras launched. Zegras didn't. And I understand too, every big hit, the way momentum works, you're going to rise after contact.
Yeah.
I get it. Zegras was low till contact. He was not looking for the head. So by the definition of the rulebook, he should not have been tossed from the game unless the refs deemed he was trying to hurt him, which if that was the conclusion they came to, what the hell are we doing here?
Yeah, it's one of those situations where they called it. I mean, they did what we said to do, which is call it. If you're unsure, call it, and then you review, but then they were kind of hampered by the rules because they're like, upon review, there was contact to the head, but our only option here is 5 in a game or nothing. Yeah. So anyways, it all, like, whether you can argue that one, I think that one is so close. It's like within an inch or two of being completely clean or completely dirty. It just points to how bad the Zegras one was to not be called at all. More in the NHL very quickly. Boston, you mentioned it. I you know me, I'm not going to call Boston's downfall, but how big would this be for Atlantic Division or Eastern Conference wildcard hopefuls if Boston is actually throwing in the towel here? Because you're talking Brad Marchand on the trade block right now, which is, I never thought I'd say that.
I don't care. And I'm going to give a point. Brad Marchand can get traded to whatever contender needs a rental. He'll be all the better for it. They'll be all the better for it. If they trade Marchand, Boston's probably signaling, we know what we are as a team, and that's a team that probably needs to rebuild unless they can pull some miracles in the offseason. Throw everything you can at them to get David Pastrnak. I'm just saying.
Oh man. I'm all for it. I don't care whenever you have a team with like a superstar who people are like, oh, what's happening? But then you look at the whole team, they're all playing so bad that you're saying, what's happening? Try to peel them away.
Look at Pasternak's stats since Christmas. He ain't falling off.
No.
He is scorching.
Yeah.
He is just as good as he's always been. And if Boston is even thinking about trading him or starting a rebuild, everything in the kitchen sink, please and thank you.
And the reason I bring them up is because forever we've talked about, when the Red Wings eventually make it to contending or at least trying to be a playoff team, who's going to fall out of that spot? And we thought maybe Boston for multiple years, but you have Toronto who's still doing their thing. Florida's still doing their thing. Tampa Bay, who I think people quit on way too early, still doing their thing. Not wildly ahead of Detroit, but still there. And that order has to be shaken up eventually if you're a Detroit or an Ottawa or a team that wants to move up. Buffalo maybe, next year, TM. And it makes sense that it would be Boston. It would be a slow process, though. Boy, would it be accelerated by moving on from a Marchand type. Now, Sweeney is an interesting GM. I think if anyone makes like a hard declaration that he's all good or all bad, I don't buy that. And for Boston to be as good as they are, like, you have to give credit where credit's due. But it does feel a little wild cardy where I don't think I think there could be a big move, not necessarily in the short term, but that's a team to watch in terms of who teams do peel away from them if they choose to rebuild.
Yeah, because they might not choose to rebuild now, and let's be honest, they probably won't. Now
that we're talking about this, they're going to go on an insane 9-1 run, and
they just threw those huge contracts at Lindholm and Zadorov in the offseason. They very recently were in the we're going for this mentality. So again, my pipe dream isn't likely this trade deadline, but if next season doesn't go well for them, and the Red Wings have some cap flexibility.
I have a dumb question for you.
I'll have a dumb answer.
Zadorov is
no.
Yeah, he's $5 million for a lot of years. A lot of years.
No. That's a terrible contract.
It's bad. It's
bad. Real bad.
So
again,
2030.
With a bunch of retention, sure.
That's
absolutely.
what I mean.
Yeah, we've talked about it. We here on the Winged Wheel podcast love Nikita Zadorov and his villain, says everything on his mind, the way he plays. Like, we respect the hustle.
5 more years after this one, and he's making $5 million. So if they retain,
got like 3.5 all day, every day. Give me that for a second pair, third pair, lefty, all in. But what's that? Forget what the player costs you. What's that retention cost you? A lot. That's a lot of money to be absorbing if you're Boston.
You want some nastiness.
Again, the theory of getting Zadorov, I'm all in on. But as we've talked about ad nauseum for the last few years, the theory of a lot of players we're all in on, the reality of what you got to pay to acquire them far exceeds that theory. So,
well, okay, Boston, let's say they want to get out, because you said, kind of like Nashville, they threw out some big contracts and they're staring down the barrel with them right now. The NHL is becoming more want than we've seen in the past to move on from contracts soon after signing them. So if Boston goes that direction and they're like, well, we don't want age 35 Zadorov, we already don't like the way he's fitting on this team, and we just get out from this, maybe the price isn't that high. You get max or close to max retention, so he comes in at 2.5 to 3.5. And would you do like a second in Wallinder kind of thing?
Oh, I'd entertain the hell out of that.
I have no. That's probably so far off. There's people like punching their screens right now.
I don't think Boston would accept that. But if that's the cost, I'm all $3.5 million for an above average number 5 defenseman. We'll call him, because I think he's
one of the worst hypotheticals I've given you in a long time.
I know. I
acknowledge it,
but I think he's an okay second pair defenseman. I think he's a really good. I'd argue an ideal bottom pair defenseman, because that's where you put the intimidation factor on your team. You don't need to give him big minutes. He's a capable player. Like, he's not a Ryan Reeves type where he's only out there to intimidate. Zadorov can play hockey. And yeah, I'd be all for it. I think that cost would be way too low. I think that's honestly a second, and Wallinder is probably the going rate in the NHL just to have $1.5 million retained for 5 years.
Not if you're Chicago. Chicago set that price too low.
But again, like you said about Sweeney, I don't think he's a dummy. I think I don't think he's a great GM, but I don't think he's one of the idiots out there. So I'd entertain it, but again, the reality of what would take is probably not happening.
He would have to apologize to Lucas Raymond.
He did. Remember after he got suspended for him, he's like, yeah, watch it, that was a bad hit.
No, but then remember,
when he called him out for the slashing thing, yeah.
And then he did the same thing, like a hypocrite.
I would pay money to be you know how hockey player meatheads are?
Oh, yeah.
That would be the first thing they would joke with him about in the room. He gets traded to the Red Wings, he walks in the room, Raymond's just standing in the middle there, shaking his hand, staring at him, smirking.
100%.
And then they laugh about it, get over it immediately.
I love that about hockey. Where I played, there are two travel teams in the same city, and obviously you're like it's like a derby if you're playing, English Premier League. That's the biggest rivalry. You hate those guys, and you grow up playing. Typically, people don't switch back and forth. So I grew up hating the guys from the other team every time we'd play. Like that's how much you hate them by the time you're like 16, 17 years old. Finished playing in travel, because I'm like, I'm not going to go get my head knocked off in junior C. I'm 115 pounds. I would die. And you play on your high school team because now you're allowed to. And there's those guys where I'm like, I hate this dude so much. The dirtiest plays I've made in my life were on like this one player I'm thinking of. On my high school team, immediately you're laughing your ass off about the stuff that happened on the ice.
100%.
Gassing him up on the ice, going out of your way to try to feed him passes. Like that's just the way, that's just how guys are.
Yeah.
We're idiots.
Guys are dudes.
Yeah. Girls are dudes.
And Zadorov, you could
argue it's just hockey players are dudes.
And you could argue Zadorov's the ultimate hockey dude.
Oh, man. Evan would be so happy for it.
Oh, he would be. The violence per 60 in Detroit would skyrocket.
Okay, can I, in honor of Evan not being here, I have to give a little bit of what his opinion would be. I am disappointed. Like, I know Sherratt did something. I don't know if he thought it was Zegras because the 77 and the 11 looked like the same. He gave something to Vetrano. I do want to see, just for the sake of like the caveman in me, maybe it's stupid. I do want to see more of a response when this crap happens to the Red Wings. I want a little bit more snarl. Like Middleton and Larkin. Like Larkin can defend himself. Larkin can go at it. Absolutely. They were hacking each other. But I'm like, man, like it's this stage of the season where you really don't want to lose Larkin. I would have loved for someone to gotten in there and maybe they would have made a mistake and put Detroit on the penalty kill and it would have cost them the game. Absolutely. That's the kind of thing you can't be doing consistently. But I would have loved for Zadorov to go in, or a Zadorov type to go in and just settle that situation so your captain and one of your best players doesn't have to.
Even the way Gudas was running around, just a guy like Zadorov to grab him and go, it's me and you or not at all.
Yeah.
And then if they throw it on, they throw it on. If they don't, they don't.
Remember when Klim Kostin was supposed to be that guy and Gudas just knocked him out of the lineup?
So we're so far down the hypothetical, I'm getting weird now. You have to take Zadorov at full pop, but it brings down the acquisition cost of Pasternak, and you're taking you're taking, what would that be, 16 mil off the Bruins books.
Great, wonderful, awesome. You make it work. We out the nose about how much you have to do to try to add a superstar. Oh, you have to add a guy with way too much term and too much. It's still a bit too much money. Oh, the cap's going up by $1 quadrillion over the next 3-4 years.
Which I want to pause you on that point, which is the whole reason Boston wouldn't do it, because they're not worried about the cap with the way the cap's going. But continue.
This is what happens when Evan's not here. We're just stupid and off the rails. You think I control this? No, Evan's the real puppet master.
I just love the thought of either one of those players in a Red Wings uniform, but understand the reality that it's probably never going to happen. And I guess we're just going to have to go throw all our money at Mitch Marner. By the way, did you see that one pass he made last night?
Mitch Marner in overtime in TD Garden, baby.
I'm not even talking about the overtime.
Oh, sorry, the pass,
where he dropped the puck into his own feet and then like kicked it behind his other foot, and it was a perfect pass. He follows up, gets the rebound, and almost scores on it. This is why I hate Leaf fans. You're telling me that dude's not sick, and I get it. He hasn't shown up in all the playoffs. Are you kidding me? What we would kill as Wings fans for another player like that, or a player like that. Raymond's getting there. Raymond might already be there. But are you kidding me? And by the way, in the Leafs' tenure of all their playoff disappointments, Mitch Marner has the most points. Oh, more than Matthews, more than Nylander. And then
he's feeling it right now. A confident Marner's different. 2
primary assists in the gold medal game at the Four Nations. I'm just saying, I understand the Rantanen stands out there, and I would pay Rantanen an unholy amount of money. Marner's the primary target if both get to market.
I like that we've fallen into 3 different camps. You're on Marner. I'm still on Rantanen, and Evan is anyone please but Elias Pettersson. To which we say, which one? On that note, we are completely off the rails. Apologies. We're going to go to break, and when we're back, the final segment here on the Winged Wheel podcast.
We're going to overtime.
Overtime is brought to you by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. If you want to support the show, again, the bonus episodes, the Discord, the giveaways, all of that and lots more. You allow us to host Winged Wheel podcast nights at the LCA. You allow us to support the Jamie Daniels Foundation. You allow us to continue to grow the show and do other cool stuff. We have a lot in the pipeline for you. Everything that we do is thanks to our patrons. So again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. Before we get to questions, we have a quick correction from the last episode. I erroneously said, when we were talking about the Four Nations and the All-Star game and all that, that the NHL doesn't have to do the All-Star game next year because they have the Olympics. Wrong. What I should have said is they don't have to do the All-Star break and then nothing else, because there is still, with the New York Islanders hosting on Long Island, an All-Star weekend. Now, what the exact format is going to be remains to be seen, and whether they're going to continue to do All-Star games before the either Olympics and World Cup, I think that remains to be seen. I imagine in some capacity, but it's supposed to be like a send-off before the Olympics happen, which is a 17-day affair, I believe it is. So that I should have corrected, because there's still one more planned at least.
It's okay. You can be forgiven for forgetting about it, because everybody who watches it will immediately forget it the second it finishes.
Is it, not to dive too far into it, are the All-Star games and skills competitions of old that we loved growing up, where it actually had something to it, are those gone, or is that just because we were kids?
They're dead. And I don't know what changed or why it changed. Players used to care back then, like winning the All-Star game, scoring. Like, remember mid-90s, Ray Bourque scored the winning goal in the last minute. Huge celly, TD Garden's going nuts. Like,
go back to North America versus World.
It mattered to them. Players now have this, I'm too cool to try. Like, and back then, nobody was throwing hits in the All-Star game, but like, you wanted to win. They don't care anymore. They're just out there for a lap, and it's not a uniquely hockey problem. The NBA All-Star game might be the worst sporting event I've ever seen in my life.
That was a tough look.
And every sport's like that. So I don't know what the solution is. I get it. The NHL and all the leagues want to keep it around because it's money. It's more bums in seats. It's
sponsors.
It's like, it's more revenue for them. So I get it, but I cannot understate how little I care about any of that anymore.
All right, jumping into Patreon questions. Michigander in LA says, hey guys, I was reading the Agents Anonymous poll in The Athletic, and while there are definitely valid criticisms of Yzerman in the front office, it was crazy to me that one agent said Detroit had been, quote, given the keys to the kingdom. I feel like most people forget just how bad this team was when Yzerman took over. DeBrincat, Petrie, Kosa, ASP, Bochelnikov, Kiiskinen, and Buyam, among others, are still results of trades of guys who were on that terrible 2019-2020 team. Is there really that much noise around the playoff drought that people in the industry can't see how bright the future is despite an abysmal amount of luck? Or is it just that agents don't look at the prospect pools?
Look at Buffalo, look at Edmonton forever. You're nothing until you get over the hump. Everything in the future is potential, but until that potential is realized. And again, think of how bad the Red Wings have been for the last 8, 9, 10 years. Nobody outside of Detroit's paying attention to them. Like,
I will say though, like, I do see Michigander in LA's point. Like, I do think that's wrong to say that he was handed the keys to the kingdom. Criticisms of individual moves aside, I'm sorry, Seider was a bold pick. Raymond was a no-brainer. Edvinsson wasn't a surefire pick. Kasper wasn't a surefire pick. Like, you've had to make the most, and in at least a couple drafts here, you have potentially, you know, the best, if not the second best player out of the draft, way out of the first two picks. And so to me, like, he wasn't given the keys to the kingdom, and he had to unknot such a cluster of a terrible cap structure that was left to him by Ken Holland, who just couldn't manage in this cap era. So you have criticisms, and I do agree, until you make it, the rest of the league won't appreciate you, and that's just the way it is, and that's probably how it should be. But to say that he's been handed the keys to the kingdom, and to me, that's stupid.
That's insane, because not only did he have all these awful contracts and this awful team when he took over in 2019, the 3 first-round picks that Ken Holland left for him, which the most important things you need in a rebuild, were all whiffs. Like,
yeah.
3 top, well, Cholowski wasn't a top 10 pick, but then you get Rasmussen at 9th overall, which again, fine player, but not a first-round pick. And Zadina, I mean,
Svechnikov before that, like, there's not, you walked in, it's not like you're San Jose. It's not like you're Chicago now where like, okay, yeah, things are terrible with Bedard. What are they going to do? They still have Bedard. In San Jose, like they have Smith, they have Celebrini, they have picks. Like Yzerman walked in with the most destitute situation that I think exists in the NHL.
An awful team, a full cap, and no prospects. Like, again, we have been critical of a lot of what Yzerman's done, but I think anybody with half a brain understands that the day he took over the Red Wings, no team in the league was in a worse position than the Detroit Red Wings.
All right, 2 questions here I think are related. Named after the Perfect Human says, last season, 65 points through 58 games. This season, 66 points through 58 games. Doesn't seem right to be a point ahead this year so far with how diabolical of a start to the season they had, but hey, I'll take that extra point that could have gotten us into the playoffs last year at any point. And the other comment here is from Podgy713, says through 58, we're basically in the same spot as last year. The road was very different, but a big thing I've noticed is Brad not mentioning XYZ is unsustainable every podcast like last season. What have been the biggest sustainable factors in this run? So, and I think that's a great point. And like we joke, but it actually is kind of an indicator that it does feel a bit different this season.
Yeah, we don't want to take our victory lap about being right about some of those things last year because it ended with pain. But there are some things that feel unsustainable, like that power play is probably going to come
scary
back
good
down.
in a couple ways.
Yeah, it's probably going to come down, but the goaltending has been good, but not elite. That's sustainable. The overall team defense and new systems under McLellan, not elite, which makes it feel sustainable.
The offense it's not like Larkin's had a cold streak in here. So it's not like the offense has been, clicking at an unsustainable rate.
Yeah, there's no one thing that you're looking at going, there's no way that holds up outside of the power play.
Yeah.
Right? So there is optimism. This also is in large part due to guys like Kasper on the roster. They didn't have him last year. Edvinsson, they didn't have him last year. It's more sustainable when you have better players. And yeah, we obviously miss Gustafsson and Perron, but these guys bring different elements, and that does change things.
Your dad's favorite beer league goalie says there's a lot of talk about EP40, Marner, and Rantanen just due to UFAs and underperformance, but I want to kick the tires on some different names this go around. Couple of teams that need serious retools or to be torn down to the studs are the Blues and the Preds. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't interested in Kyrou or Thomas. A Nyquist reunion doesn't sound too bad. Maybe one more year of Luke Schenn at 2.75. I know you guys aren't making the trip down to Columbus, but I'm excited to see the Dub Dub Club come out in full force this weekend in my second Wings outdoor game. Let's see if they can top the Big House in vibes per 60.
If you're looking for depth pieces that maybe come cheaper than a second round pick, Nyquist and Schenn might not be terrible options.
Nyquist, it would tickle my.
Oh, I'd love it. I would be so. He was one of my favorites when he was here.
For an era where nothing happened, I was so sad when they traded him.
As for the other one, I'd be all in on Robert Thomas. All in. Zero chance St. Louis is giving him up. Like, a player that good just does not go to market. And again, with what St. Louis has been doing, I have a hard time seeing them make any moves that shift dramatically towards a rebuild. Kyrou, I like. His consistency scares the hell out of me for that contract. The talent's there. Doesn't strike me as an Yzerman type. He does not seem like the type of guy Yzerman's going to be willing to pay that contract to, let alone give up a first round pick +4.
While we're at it, for everything going around about Pettersson right now, like, you either believe that this is all injury related or you don't want that kind of player on your team.
Yeah. Oh, 1,000%.
Jason Thompson says this team has improved a lot since the coaching change, but this team still seems to have a pretty serious issue keeping their heads. Is this just something that will have to be learned the hard way? I think it's to a degree, yes, and to a degree it's personnel, right? Like, teams who struggle with talent up and down the lineup are not going to hang on to games as consistently. It's not about buckling down and worse players make more mistakes. That's the simple truth to it. But a lot of it is learned too. I'm a big believer in the NHL. Being good is half the battle. You need to learn how to win, especially in such a team-oriented sport. in a sport where things are going to go against your way, where injuries are common. It's a long grind of a season. You need to understand how to win in different ways, and that's going to have to come over time. McLellan has done a phenomenal job, better than anyone could have predicted, and he's still going to have a lot of work ahead of him come October of 2025. So 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Mark Cheever says, does Simon Edvinsson have more offensive upside than Mo Seider? Recency bias aside, he's shown the ability to score in a number of ways, snap, wrister, slap shots, and has that breakout pass ability. Are 60-plus point seasons realistic at his peak?
Realistic? No. Possible? Yeah.
Depends on your definition of realistic. I think, yeah, definitely possible.
More than Seider? Like, again, possible, I would say, but I wouldn't call it likely.
I think I don't know that you can give any one of them greater than a 59% probability of having more offensive upside than the other, right? They're not perfectly the same player, but they both kind of strike me as guys who definitely have a lot of offensive ability for a defenseman who's so good in a defensive role, and they still have a lot of growing and learning to do. Based on age and, raw tools, I do think Edvinsson could be poised to, absolutely have more upside, but it's still too early to tell. I still think, I know Seider seems like a consistent steady. He gives you, 40 to 60 points every year. I still think there's more to him. What happens when he's on a better team and the decor is more fleshed out, and maybe there's a guy who can eat up a lot of big minutes further down the lineup. Seider still has maturing to do as a defenseman. I know he's played every single game possible, but there's room above his head. Hard to believe because he's the size of Brad and I stacked on top of each other. All right, last one here. And Brad, this is because I want to give you an opportunity to say something to the camera. Joseph Barry says, are we ready to give Detroit a better than 50-50 chance to make the playoffs yet? Or would you wait until the 2 Columbus games to go past?
Maybe.
I think Money Puck has them at 54 or so right now.
That feels about right. But again, the Columbus games could swing that dramatically. So definitely we're waiting till after the Columbus games.
2 regulation wins against Columbus. Are you saying it into the camera?
Nope.
It's because it was your voice before the curb music, right?
We have to be sitting there looking at the standings with 4 games left, and there's no mathematical way anybody can catch the Red Wings. They're clinched. They're in. Even then, I'm skeptical because asteroids and stuff.
Yeah, although that one is dropping in probability, so.
Yeah, well, where the target might be LCA. Honestly, puck drop in round 1, I'll say it.
Until I see Al the Octopus being lowered from the Jumbotron, I am going to have a hard time believing it too. Well, I don't want to spoil anything, but we had so much planned for that. We went into overdrive to plan for playoff content. We had, it's all just waiting there now. Okay. On that note, why don't we wrap up this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast? We are going to be back with you Sunday. We will see how these 2 games against Columbus go. Thank you all so very much for tuning in. We really, really appreciate you taking time out of your day to listen to an Evanless episode, which I know that sucks for folks, but should be back next episode. To all the sponsors of the Winged Wheel Podcast, thank you. And to all of our Patreon supporters, we could not do this without you. Patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast if you want to support the show. And if Patreon's not for you, but you still want to go the extra mile for us, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify. Subscribe, leave a thumbs up, a rating, a review, tell a friend about the show. All of that helps a ton. To all of our name level sponsors on Patreon, we could not do this without you. Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Akefer, THL Champ, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Alexander Hansen, Ghost of OSBP, Glenn Brabham, Sea Lion, Matthew M. Rice, Adam Rose, Adam Zoiza, Admiral Matt S. of the Cheesebag Navy, Alex Toger, Anna Sleeman, new name level supporter, Asher Killian, Beer League legend, Best James Bond, Bingo Bango, Brandon Mann, Carl Bertininen Aluski, Carl Provi, CB55, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, DJ Denton, Eric Hill, Give Blood Fight Probert, Goose Looney's Drinking Club, Grand Rapids Girly, Griffin God Creatives, Hatrick Sandine Pelika, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam Al Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, James McLean, aka Jambo, Jeff Pridemore, Jennifer Morris, John Ingalls, Jonathan Miller, Kaylin Wood, Kasper the Friendly Post, Lunchbox, Mark Hernandez, Marty, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, Mr. Kuzi. Now I have to learn how to click on a Macintosh, Podgy713, RA, Roy Donk, Ryan Britt, Sam Bankson, Skeletor, Slim Smitty Cards, Stephen Ortlieb, That's What I Appreciate About You, Wallman's Elite Dancing D, Wings Fan of Chicago, Iserplan Stan, Aaron Hudson, General Andy behind the Cheesebag Army, $20 extra for a dad's room, AA Ron, AB, All Motor No Hands, Ian Stanislavski, Antonio Gracias, Bellingham Acid Balls, Bex, Bing Bop Boom 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 Bop Bam, C.E. Hayes, Chimkim Nutgits, Chris Felinsky, Commander Ben Barron of the Cheesebag Space Force, Connor Layton, Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Datsukes Dangleberries, Deep In, Cider, Dylan Larkin Trade Sacrifice, DeLucas Larkmint, Eric Nance, Evan Beckner, Gene Sullivan, Grepsky, Griffey Boy, James Pridemore, Johnny Page, Jeremiah Dobo, Jim, JM Rhapsody, Josh Yelton, Chaotic Monkey, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Larkin's Loyal Lemming, Lennon Vandersan, Linda Hull, Lonnie Zone, Lucas Raitman, Mitch Minier, Noted Soderblom, Worshipper, Joey Jojo Shabadoo, O Ophelia, As Good As It Gets, Reed, Ryan M, Sandy P Right Hand D, Steven, That Other Guy, The Hodag, The Hat 123, Trent Thorough, Wings Fan of St. Louis Scott, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. Don't worry, you'll have Evan back next episode.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to visit wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you'll find links to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find ways to support the show, like Patreon, official podcast merchandise, and more. And don't forget to follow us on X at Winged Wheel Pod, at Ryan Hanna, WWP, at Brad Crisco, and at Hockeytown Evan, as well as Winged Wheel Podcast on Instagram.